All right. It's about 11:05, so I guess we will get going. This is Christina McNeill.
You could introduce yourself first.
And I'm Kim Nguyen. And so we wanted to talk to you today about things that we found have helped us in running distributed teams. And I don't mean running in the sense that we're telling people what to do, but these are really just things that we found have helped us in the teams that we've been a part of. I guess we wanted to say a few words about ourselves. I started off as a developer, and I worked for about 12 years at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, where I brought Plone to the campus, and by the end of the time I was working there, we had over 300 websites running Plone. Most of them were public sites. Some of them were very large, very complex sites with lots and lots of content. Others were intranets, and we had a particularly successful initiative to develop Plone forms with Plone FormGen and a number of other tools to develop workflow systems, electronic workflow approval, multi-approval process systems. And so I stopped working there in the spring, and I'm now working for Wildcard, where Nathan Van Giem works, where the primary client has been the FBI. So if you see all the FBI most wanted posters and things like that, they're hosted on a Plone site, a very sophisticated site with a lot of security. I guess I probably shouldn't say more about it. And I also work for Jazzcarta as a developer. And as many of you know, I do a lot of things with the Plone community.
Okay. My name is Christina McNeill, and I'm not used to talking to microphone, so. I work for Penn State at the Office of Student Aid. I've been there for about 4.5 years now, which is exactly the amount of time that I've been working with Plone. It is kind of a one-person web shop, although I am teaching 2 people who are developers. I'm teaching them Plone now, which is pretty exciting that I get to share with somebody else what I've been doing. So I come from the content side, and I'm starting now to kind of get more into the depth of Plone and taking Python class. So I won't be making any commits on GitHub though. So yeah, we just, Kim and I are involved in many different teams in the Plone community, and so we wanted to share some things we've kind of learned the hard way along the way. So we'll get started.
So one of the things I was fortunate enough to participate in at the university was an IT leadership program. And some of the things that people talk about in terms of leadership are not about, again, not about telling people what to do, but really in nurturing others who work with you and making them fulfill their own potential and do better and keep learning so that as a team, everyone benefits. And so a lot of those ideas that I was introduced to were things that I wanted to experiment on people in the Plone community with. So that's where a lot of these things have sort of helped guide the things that we used in our teams. So really, why are distributed teams so important to Plone? Well, it's because we know that as individuals, we can only do so much, and we have to work in groups. And really, because Plone is such a widely distributed community, the success of these distributed teams means the success of Plone. We've all been part of teams that did really poorly because of communication problems or personality conflicts, where they've essentially sabotaged themselves and things just never got delivered. And we've also been parts of teams that were able to deliver things on time, and that's a great feeling. So really, these tips that we're going to talk about today are ways to not necessarily guarantee success, but really ways to just boost the effectiveness of your own teams. So we know usually you're going to be somewhere in the middle ground. You're not going to be a spectacular failure. You're not necessarily going to be a spectacular success, but let's bump it up a little bit towards the successful end. Do you want to say anything? Okay. So, teamwork. Of course, in this case, you're not going to go anywhere if both teams are successful. Do you want to say?
Okay, so there's kind of 3 layers when you're working with distributed teams. Okay, so you have the normal team challenges, which if you don't work alone, you have like who's going to fill what different roles. You have personalities that you have to take into consideration, and the organization of the group, who's going to lead the group. And when you're all in the same room, these things can be very complicated. But if you add remote teams on top of that, some of the biggest challenges that we found are, one, finding ways to collaborate that everyone can contribute, tools specifically. And also, it's very difficult to gain momentum and then maintain momentum. So when you see people in the office, and then you can kind of feed off each other's energy when you have a team, but when you never see people, or you only see them, through the screen, especially across time zones, which gets into some of the global challenges, is time and distance. You have different cultural norms and different cultural practices within the business. And then language can also be a barrier as well.
Do you want to say anything about the language thing, or later?
I was going to do that later.
All right. I did want to add that the question of momentum is something that we noticed really affected our ability to keep moving ahead on the things that we wanted to do as teams. And we're going to talk to you about the different teams that we applied these ideas to. But if you're in the office and you see each other several times a day, you kind of remind yourselves that, oh yeah, I meant to finish writing that document for you. But if you're remote, you only really see each other maybe once a week, and then real life intrudes and you're doing your other work, and so it's hard to remember to just, oh yeah, I have to do that thing that I said I was going to do last week. So, and again, some of these things may seem obvious, but we did want to just refresh everyone's ideas of what these. They're not really secrets. I mean, we call them secrets, but they're not. Planning the meeting is really important. So the model that we use for the teams that we've worked with for Plone is that we usually have a meeting once a week or once every 2 weeks. And it's important to give people a sense for what is expected out of the meeting. Because if you just show up and you have the meeting, if you spend half the time in the meeting talking about what you're going to do, you've wasted half the time, and people's time is very precious. So planning the meeting means knowing where you're going to go. And so I guess the triptych idea from the American Automobile Association is a uniquely American thing. So that's a travel plan kit that you can get that helps you decide where you're going to go.
So planning the meeting is planning the meeting, but also planning for the meeting. So these are a couple things that we found were helpful, is to share the agenda beforehand. And if you have any other documents that you want people to, things that they need to know before the meeting, make sure that you share those things beforehand as well so people have time to read them. Scheduling, especially with remote teams, it's best if you can schedule them and be consistent, so that it's like every Friday or every other Friday at 10 o'clock, whatever time zone that may be, and make sure that you distinguish that. I found that out the hard way as well. But be consistent so that your meeting is always the same day, same time, and the same place by whatever method that you use, so that people get into a rhythm and they know what to expect. And the other thing that we found was really important is when you're forming a group for the first time is to agree on your tools up front. So have a discussion, okay, so if we're gonna edit documents, how are we gonna do that? Is everybody okay with Google Documents, or should we be using something else? So that everyone, make sure that everyone has access and that we're all on the same page.
The bullet point where we asked the question, do you need a meeting, is really, we found this over the last few months in particular. If you've set good goals in your team and you know everyone in the team is still working towards them, sometimes it's good to say, we'll meet for 5-10 minutes and just check to see if there's any changes. And if there are no changes, we'll take the time that we allocated in our calendar to actually do the things like write the documents or edit the documents or other tasks that we'd already set out. So that's really a question that even though you have a regular scheduled meeting time, you might choose to use a majority of that time to just make progress on those goals. So, go ahead.
So we kind of already talked about Google Drive and Google Docs. The teams that we've been on, those primarily the collaboration, those are the tools that we use. Google Calendar, we kind of accidentally found out is really helpful. You can set up a recurring event, and unfortunately it doesn't send emails to people, but it will show up on their calendar. But the nice thing about it is that you can use, if you use Google Hangouts, it will give you the same URL. So if you've ever used Google Hangouts before, every time you create a new Hangout, it gives you a new URL. But if you set up a recurring meeting in Google Calendar, it will give you the same URL and you can use that for every single meeting, which is, and it's not just a bunch of letters and numbers. It will give you actually, like if your team is Team Blue, that your URL will have Team Blue in it, which is easy to remember.
You're going to find that we ended up standardizing on using Google for a lot of these, for most of this work. And as a longtime proponent of Plone, it feels kind of weird to say, oh, let's use Google instead of Plone. But just the integration of the tools and the real-time editing capability has made a big difference. It was very effective for us.
So the second secret that we have, which isn't really a secret, is managing the meeting. So these are some of the things that you can do when the meeting is actually taking place. So most important thing is that we're a volunteer community, so you need to respect people's time. If you can't respect people's time, then you can expect to lose members of your team. So you need to start on time and you need to end on time. And especially when you have people distributed across the globe, you know, a lot of our team meetings, it's very late in the evening, so you're working around some people who are trying to put their kids to bed, and when I meet, it's during my work day. You know, so everybody has other commitments, so make sure you start and end on time. And follow the agenda and stay on topic. And I have to say, this is the most frustrating and one of the most important things that you can do. It's just because you have such a limited time. If you can stick with the agenda, or if you're using a task manager such as GitHub, you can use that as your agenda for the meeting to kind of keep everyone on track. And when the conversation starts to kind of go its own direction, you can redirect back and say, okay, well, you know, let's move on to the next item on the agenda.
We also want to remind people that in teams, there are so many different talents that come from all the different members, and people have different personalities. And you know, if you get somebody like me, I can talk a long time. And so you want to usually calm somebody down who talks a lot and ask the people who are quiet if they have an opinion. And sometimes it's the quiet ones who are sitting there thinking about all the stuff that needs to happen, and you need to bring that input to the group. And so that's really what we're talking about here, about personality dynamics, and we'll say some more about it on some of the individual teams. The point about recording the minutes of the meeting is very important, not only for people within the team to remind themselves of what it is that they said that they were going to do, but it's also important when we want to share that information back out to the community and explain, again, what we're doing and where we're trying to go, and allow the community some ability to provide input and maybe to jump in and help. So the recording of the minutes and the action items is very, very important. Otherwise, when you meet again the next time, nobody remembers what they said they were going to do, and so it's very hard to maintain progress.
These are some of the tools that you can use to manage face-to-face meetings. We use Google Hangouts primarily because it's free and it's right there. And because we use Google Docs, so it just makes it easier. But you can also use Skype for group. And then I haven't used Firefox Hello, have you? Do you want to talk about that? And then there's FaceTime. So if you just need to have a quick face-to-face with someone and they happen to have an Apple account, you can also use FaceTime, which has much better clarity than using Hangouts.
Yeah, the Google Hangouts, again, because we ended up standardizing on using Google as has been our default tool. Skype, for some of the teams that I've worked on for, say, for Jazzcarta, Skype is what we use for voice calls, so we don't always use video. We mostly don't use video. So it's up to you. Some people feel better seeing faces and reading facial expressions, and it can be very important. Other times you can just skip it and you get better audio quality, I guess, if you don't use video sometimes. Firefox Hello is just since I'm a promoter of open source, Firefox Hello is now built into all the Firefox browsers, and it's a very easy way to do a one-to-one communication with another person just by sending a simple URL. I'll talk about, these are tools that we use to remember the things that we said that we would do. So really they're sort of to-do lists. And the first one I put in there, and it's not in any particular order, is this tool I discovered called Active Inbox, and it's an add-on to Gmail. And if you're like me and you receive a lot of email, it's hard to remember the things that you need to work on, because all of the incoming mail just pushes everything to the bottom of your list. And so Active Inbox is not a free tool, but it's something that's not expensive, and I found it to be extremely effective for the work that I do in Gmail accounts. So I would encourage you to take a look at that.
Yeah, so it depends on what your personal preference is. These are task managers. They pretty much have the same functionality. So you just pick the tool that you prefer to use. So I don't think we really need to get into all the details of each one. So the third point is to communicate between meetings. Okay, some ways that you can communicate between meetings is email. Like I said before, the teams that Kim and I are on involves a lot of collaborative editing, which we use Google Docs. For things like the Plone 5 posters, if you're doing design work, there's invisioapp.com, which is free. And it's a great way that you can comment on a design, and it could be a wireframe, it could be a web theme, whatever, but you can have a bunch of people collaborate and leave comments, and you can edit the design from there. We also use Google Drive, and you can share folders on that, and then for chat, IRC and Slack.com. One of the things that has been helped to make some aspects of our team successful is to be available. And that doesn't mean that you're available at any given time on any communication tool. It just means that people know that when you're available, so if they have questions, that you are there to answer them, or they know that you're going to be able to get them an answer when you have time.
The folder point in Google Drive is something that is I found to be useful, because if you're dealing with a team you generally end up sharing your documents with the team members. And if you have to remember to do that on every document you create, it can be very time-consuming and you can forget somebody. So a shortcut that we found is to create a folder in Google Drive, assign the permissions to that folder, and obviously, well, maybe not obviously, the documents you create in that folder automatically inherit those permissions. So it's like Plone. Yes, Google Drive is like Plone. And so that's a shortcut that we've used. So if you're working on different projects with different teams, you just create the folders and everyone has access to the folders. That's a nice way to do it. For the Google Docs collaborative editing, something else that we found works is that rather than have everybody just make edits to a document, and what we do is we make an initial version of the document and then we ask everybody else to use the suggesting mode in Google Docs, which allows them to say, over in this line, whatever changes I type in show up highlighted so that other people can see what those changes were and then review them, comment on each of those individual changes, and then say, yes, this is accepted, or no, we're not going to do that. It's a nice way to let people know what your input has been to a document, as opposed to just seeing the document in its final form and not understand who is making what change. You mentioned in-document chat too?
No.
Google Docs has this, when you're looking at a particular document, there's a little chat icon, which can be very useful because when you click on that, you can actually start discussing the document while you're editing the document. There's so many different ways to use these tools, but that was one that we found very cool because you can see who's editing the document, and when you see them online, you can actually just type out a message and then they'll see it. So you don't have to hunt for IRC or Slack or email or whatever other tool, you're right in there. Do you want to?
No, I think you should talk about this one because you followed up on it much better than I did.
Okay. So point 4 is sharing with the community. So we've talked about planning the meeting, managing the meeting, and then the actual tools, communicating within the team. But then this last point is something that a certain person in the audience gave me a lot of grief over, and rightfully so. In one of the instances of the teams, we didn't do as well as we should have with sharing with the community. And these are words of wisdom, right? So one of the reasons why you want to share what you've been doing with the community is because then other people can see that activity and feel like, oh, someone's actually taking care of that. Isn't that nice? And hopefully they get enthusiastic enough and maybe they have ideas and they can contribute. So it's how we can build enthusiasm and further volunteer activity. So within the community, we need to do things like tell people, obviously, who's on the team. Sometimes if people feel like they don't know who's a member of a particular team, they don't have as much confidence in what's happening. Or sometimes they might see who's on the team and feel less confidence. Okay, bad joke. The agenda for the meetings is nice if you can give it ahead of time to the community. In the case of the Plone Foundation Board, that's something
which we're going to talk about later.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so there are good reasons why you want to share what you're doing with the community. It's also in the interest of transparency. We don't want to turn into a sort of a closed source model. We're a very open community.
So these are some of the ways that you can share with the community. It seems to be that Twitter is the social media channel of choice. So you can post your agenda on Twitter or link to it. We also have community.plone.org, and there is a tag announcements, and then there are team minutes under that. And the framework team especially has been excellent about posting their team minutes there. And then there's also, if you have your own personal blog, and then you can post your team meeting minutes there as well. And all of these things, these sources get pulled into the Plone newsletter, which goes out once a month, and then that's an additional way that you can share what's happening with your team.
And the way Christina knows that it gets pulled into the newsletter every month is because she writes the newsletter. Okay, so people think is this term that we came up with because we were trying to capture what's involved in managing team members and the dynamics within a team. And it turns out that no one's registered this as a domain, so obviously it's a new concept. So this is really what we're trying to capture here. When you're forming a team, it's important to have a good mix of people because different people bring different skills. It's obviously if you have people who all come from the same background, for example, all developers, because developers are the bad guys in the Plone community. Is that on record? You really do benefit from having a diversity of opinion, a wide range of experience, and a wide range of ideas. Within the group, you want to, as I mentioned before, you want to deal with the different kinds of personalities. Some people are loud, some people are quiet. Let's try to even things out so that we all benefit. We also have known that in some teams that you want to think about the people who are going to consistently come through so that when they do show up in meetings, you know that they're going to keep being there and keep being part of the team momentum, that they're going to continue to do what they set out to do. And because some of these teams are long running, most of our teams are long running, that mix is going to change over time. So you have to adjust your style with each new set of team members.
Okay, so now we've given you, we've gone over the 5 things that we think help make for successful distributed teams. So now we're going to talk about kind of how those things applied and where they, well, let's just jump right into it. I don't want to jump ahead.
So the Plone Foundation Board, this is from a movie called The Star Chamber, where obviously, the Star Chamber evolved into a political weapon, symbol of misuse and abuse of power. Not the case, really, with the Plone Foundation Board. The board, which I'm a member of this year, is the team in Plone that has the most formal processes. And what's wonderful about having formal processes is you know what you have to do, and you have to do it. And so we have an agenda that has to be sent out to the Plone Foundation membership 2 days in advance, and we have to publish minutes of our meetings, which we also have to send out to the membership, and we have a schedule that we have to follow of bi-weekly meetings. So all of these things are practices that are set out in our bylaws, but they're good practices. And it'd be wonderful if all our teams could follow most of these things as much as possible. They're really good tools that have helped us a lot. In terms of managing the meetings, we have, again, standardized on using Google Hangouts for our face-to-face meetings. We use Plone for our agenda and for our minutes. We also have to do formal approval of prior meeting minutes. So this is where if we have a meeting during which we discuss all sorts of things and we set out items that we're going to accomplish, at the next meeting, we review those draft minutes to make sure that we remembered correctly everything that we were doing, and then we can approve them formally. This means that we don't have to worry that, ideally we don't forget something, and we're correct when we distribute this information to the community, that the community is aware of accurately what we were working on. There's a question.
Do you mean duration when you say minutes?
Sorry, the minute, yes, very good point. The minutes, I guess it's an English term that says these are the notes of what we discussed. Yeah, so we'll say, thank you.
Thank you for asking that. And actually, the live example, and I was going to tell this story a little bit later, but you just like proved the point of what we were talking about earlier. In when you have global teams and people from all different places and not understanding the same terms or having problems with accents. And so like minutes could mean one thing to you and it means something totally different to us. So it's very important that you make sure that you can, in a team, that your team is open enough to be able to ask those questions and to be able to explain what those terms actually mean. Because we did have an issue like that on, we haven't talked about the team yet, but, well, she's actually sitting here, but we were using, we kept talking about the Plone 5 launch team. And when you add in that Google Hangouts and the not great video quality that comes across and accents, and it was being heard as lunch and not launch. And so you're having people that are supposed to be working together on a project, but having totally different conversations or not even understanding why we're talking about lunch when we're supposed to be talking about something else. And so it could just be a word, it could be accents. I had to, I'm not sure if you all know Armin, but he talks very fast and he has a very thick German accent. And I had to explain to him that I live in central Pennsylvania. The only accent that I hear on a regular basis is country. So, and when that's what I hear all the time, and then I jump into this video conferencing and he's going 1,000,000 miles an hour, I have to tell him, okay, can we go back to number 1? I know you're on 20, but I still don't understand number 1. So those things can be really challenging to overcome, but you have to.
She also complains about Canadian accents. For communication between meetings, we relied on email on the board. And we did a lot of collaborative editing of Google Docs as well. So basic tools. And for the sharing of the activity on the board, we, in addition to publishing the minutes, we got a typo there, plone.org. We publish them on plone.org. We also post them on the community forum, the community.plone.org, and we emailed the minutes to the Plone Foundation membership list. In terms of the people think aspect of the Plone Foundation board, this year was the first year that I was on the board, and I was really privileged to see how effective the mix was of all the different people who were on the board. There were some very quiet people who just kind of stayed in the background, but whenever something needed to be done, they jumped in and did it. There were some people who would say, that idea sounds wonderful, but we tried that and it didn't work before for the following reasons. So again, very useful mix of a diverse range of skills and knowledge. And we have a very an outstanding social networker who is aware of everything that's happening in the community and is very aware and keenly a finely attuned person who knows how to deal with multiple personalities. And we have people who had been on the board 6 or 7, I think 6 terms, who knew all the history on the board and could really tell us, yes, that too we tried before, again, failed for a number of reasons or succeeded for other reasons. So it was a wonderful example of what can be accomplished when you have a really good mix of membership.
So the next team, Kim and I were both involved with Plone.com, which for some of you may or may not know, was in the works for a number of years. And it finally was launched, when was that, April?
March, right before Sorrento.
So it's been, well, I guess it's been a little more than half a year, but if you could go to the next slide. Okay, so for Plone.com, and we could give a whole presentation on this team specifically, but to just go over it real generally, we had regularly scheduled bi-weekly meetings. So every Friday at, well, in the morning for me, we knew that we were going to have a Google Hangout, and we used a task manager as our agenda to go through. We had the Google Calendar with the recurring meetings, so we had the URL, and that worked best for us. And we decided to do that because the members on the team, we all needed to have that reminder every 2 weeks. A month was too long, and we just knew it wasn't going to get done if we didn't meet on a consistent basis. For managing the meeting, like I said, we had an issue tracker and the Google Hangout URL, so I already mentioned that. Between meetings, we talked on IRC, we did a lot of email, and then there were comments on the issue tracker, which was how we kept in touch when we were working on certain things. The thing that we did not do well at all was communicate with the community. Actually, we really didn't at all until it launched. We had a private issue tracker, and at the time, that was very helpful because of the history of the project. But also, it just didn't cross our mind to take notes, and that we should be sharing that with the community. So as the team moves forward, this is something that we are going to be improving, since we didn't do it at all. We can only go up.
I did want to add, too, that the reason why the issue tracker was, another reason why the issue tracker was private is because the members of our team at the end included Gabrielle Hendricks-Parker from 6 Feet Up, and Chrissy Wainwright from 6 Feet Up, and Carol Gantz from 6 Feet Up. So they were very used to using their internal track tool as their issue tracker, and so it just seemed like an easy way to just get going. And so that's how we kind of accidentally fell onto a private tracker. But as Christina mentions, the history of Plone.com is that the project started as conceptually, I think, in 2010, and it had a number of attempts to proceed, and then they would fail. And so there was a lot of sensitivity about the direction we should go or choices we'd made over content or even designs of Plone.com. So it was helpful in a sense to keep the issue tracker private. But now that we've actually unveiled the site, we're definitely going to have to move to a public tracker.
Yeah, and we just haven't had time. That's the reason it's not on GitHub. But as Kim kind of alluded to it, the whole project just kind of fell to the wayside for a while, and I don't even know how I got roped into it. I think Liz just kind of threw it at me, and it was not something that, I don't even remember how, that I could do, and I ended up roping Kim into doing it. And we struggled for many months, just not having momentum, not having the skills to get things done, and then we ended up getting with Chrissy and Carol and Gabrielle. And so the big reason that we ended up with a private issue tracker was Gabrielle was the project manager that we needed. She stepped in. We needed someone to come in and say, you do this, you do this, you do this, because the plan was already laid out. It just needed to be accomplished. And Gabrielle set us up with the issue tracker, and then we could identify, okay, this needs to get done, this can't get done until this gets done, and then that's where we started to build momentum. And these were the roles that the people on the team fulfilled, and it also enabled us to go out and accomplish our individual tasks.
The Plone 5 launch team was I guess a relatively well-guarded secret. Ooh, yes, speed up. The idea behind the Plone 5 launch team was to coordinate the different aspects of Plone 5. So we have actually, obviously, we have a lot of confidence in our developers, in our framework team, in our release manager, but there are aspects of the product as Plone 5 is really a full product that needed to be brought up to the same speed and level as the code. So the idea of the launch team was to coordinate documentation, training, installers, marketing in addition to Plone.com and Plone.org news items and so on. So the idea behind Plone 5 launch team was to just meet every 2 weeks to coordinate. Again, same usual tools, Google Calendar, Google Docs for the agenda, collaborative editing of the agenda, a review of action items. We also have, not listed here, was a private GitHub repo where we had an issue tracker. We use Google Hangout. In terms of sharing with the community, this is where I got called onto the carpet about not having shared notes out. So eventually we were keeping notes, but we posted them finally on the community forum to share with the community after the fact, unfortunately. So again, something to do better next time. The mix of people on the launch team was just outstanding. These are all individual leaders and doers. If anything, the only thing that we were missing was just having more great people like them on the launch team.
Okay, so the next team is the marketing and communications team. And yeah, same thing here. As you can see, we have a theme going on of every 2 weeks. So I won't go over that part again. The marketing communications team, we are still, I was going to use just an American term, so now that won't come across. We're still struggling. We don't have enough people, and there is so much to do, and I think that the people who are involved have very high standards for what we would like to accomplish. So with Plone 5 coming out, a lot of normal marketing and communications got folded into the Plone 5 launch team. Now that Plone 5 has actually launched, we'll be kind of reforming and taking a look at the whole of Plone and how we can better market and communicate within the community. So over the past few months, not a whole lot was done that was separate from the launch team. So therefore, we started off well in communicating with the community. We did publish notes from one meeting, but then, as I said before, it fell into the launch team. So we kind of fell off the map in communicating. Man, I already kind of hit on this,
So just to review, these are planning the meetings, managing the meetings, the tools that we used, and sharing back within the team and with the community. And I believe
how much time do we have?
I want to talk about this.
Yeah. What? We're out of time?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Very small comment. I just wanted to say a very small thank you and a comment. You've kind of changed a perception I have when people say distributed teams. There's this idea that that's a good thing, and this is the first time I've really realized, and you've turned me on to this, that a lot of what you say there is battling the fact that distributed teams really suck. It's not. It's really not nice. So that was actually very useful for me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hi. You said that in Plone Foundation meetings, one of your first things in the meeting is to approve the prior meeting's minutes. Isn't that a waste of time or sometimes a waste of resources? We usually we approve the minutes after the meeting. First thing, the person who took the minutes emails them to anybody, and if there are comments, they are edited or publish them on a document. Why do you wait for another 2 weeks to?
I can answer that one. That is because the Plone Foundation is an official American legal entity, and we have to abide by certain rules. So it's not like any other team can do minutes and note-taking more informally, but we have to abide by American legal standards for non-profit organizations, which are relatively strict, and we also play silly games during meetings, and all in favor say aye and nay, and sounds very old-fashioned, but that's because it's a legal entity and not just a team.
Okay, we are way out of time. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.